The coffee there was never hot enough. That's the first thing I noticed. They brought it in a little paper cup with a lid, lukewarm on a tray, at exactly 7:15, the way you'd bring it to someone who couldn't be trusted with a kettle. And I sat on the edge of a bed that wasn't mine, in a room that smelled like cleaning fluid and someone else's lavender, holding a cup of coffee that no one had made the way I like it. And I thought, so this is it. This is the thing everyone keeps telling me I should be grateful for. I drank it anyway. Cold coffee is still coffee. I learned that a long time ago. My name is Evelyn Grace. I'm 92 years old, and I'm telling you about 3 days I spent in a place I never planned to go because nobody told me what those 3 days would actually be like, and I think somebody should have. You're probably watching this for a reason. Maybe you've got a mother or a father, and there's a conversation you keep almost having and then putting off. Maybe you're the one they're having the conversation about, and you can feel it coming the way you feel weather change in your knees. Or maybe you're younger than all that and you just clicked because an old woman's face is on the screen and you're not sure why you stayed. Whoever you are, I'm not going to talk down to you. I've been on every side of this now. I know how it looks from over there, where you are. I used to be over there too. Let me back up. It started, as these things do, with a fall that wasn't even a real fall. I caught my hip on the corner of the kitchen counter reaching for a dish towel. Bruised, not broken. I've had worse, but I made the mistake of mentioning it to Diana on the phone, and Diana, my youngest, told Catherine, my oldest, and by the time the two of them were done with it, you'd have thought I'd been found unconscious at the bottom of the stairs. Catherine called the following week and said we needed to talk about the house. I knew what was underneath those words. I've known Catherine for 68 years. When she says we need to talk about the house, she doesn't mean the gutters. I want to be fair to her, because it would be easy not to be. Catherine loves me. She has always loved me in that particular way that some people love, like love is a fence, like the way to keep something safe is to put it somewhere it can't move. She isn't cruel. She's frightened. She's been frightened since her father died, and she's decided, somewhere in herself, that if she just controls enough of the small things, none of the big things will be able to get in. I understand it. I just happen to be one of the small things she's trying to control. So she came over with a folder, an actual folder with printed pages in it, places she'd researched. And there was one in particular she wanted me to at least look at. Just look. Just try. Just 3 days. A respite stay. That's what they call it. Respite. As if the thing you need a break from is your own life. I said no the first 3 times. I'm not too proud to tell you that. And then Diana started crying on the phone, and Diana crying is a weather system. It just rolls over you, and somewhere in the middle of it I heard myself say, I'd do it. 3 days. Just to show them. That's the part I'm not proud of, that I went partly out of love and partly out of spite. I wanted to come home after 3 days and set that folder on the table and say, there, I survived your terrible scenario. Now leave me alone. Pride is a strange engine. It got me through worse than this. But it doesn't always take you somewhere good. Harold would have hated the whole thing. I think about him constantly in places like that. My husband. He's been gone 11 years now. He was an engineer, retired, a quiet man with a dry sense of humor that snuck up on you, and he drank his coffee black and read the newspaper every single morning the way other men go to church. 52 years we were married, and the thing about being married that long is that the person doesn't really leave when they die. They just move. They move from the chair across the table into the inside of your own head, and they keep commenting. When they wheeled in that lukewarm coffee on the first morning, I heard Harold so clearly I almost laughed. He'd have looked at that little paper cup and said something about how they'd managed to engineer a way to make coffee worse, and he'd have meant it as a compliment to their dedication. Then he'd have drunk it anyway, like me, because we were both raised by people who didn't waste things. I missed him in that room more than I've missed him in years. That surprised me. I thought I'd done most of my missing, but grief isn't a thing you finish. It's a thing you furnish. You just keep finding new rooms for it. So, the 3 days. Here's what nobody warned me about, and I'm going to tell you slowly, because each of these things deserves it. The first thing, and this is the one that nearly broke me, was the noise of being managed. I don't mean the building was loud. It was loud, the televisions and the call bells and the carts, but that's not what I mean. I mean, there is a particular sound a life makes when every part of it is being decided by someone else, and that sound is a kind of silence. It's the silence of never being asked. When do I want to eat? Decided. When do I bathe? Decided. When the lights go off, when the curtains open, what's on the television in the common room, which always seemed to be a program about people buying houses they'd never live in. None of it was mine to choose, and it wasn't that anyone was unkind. The young woman who looked after my hall, Maria, was as kind as anybody I've met. It was that kindness in that place had been organized into a schedule, and a schedule has no room in it for a person. By the second afternoon, I understood something I'd been getting wrong my whole life. I had always thought the opposite of being cared for was being neglected. I was wrong. The opposite of being cared for sometimes is being managed. You can be managed beautifully. You can be managed by people with name tags and good hearts and clean hands and still feel yourself disappearing because nobody's asking you anything anymore. They're just doing things to you on time. That's the part the brochures don't put in the folder, Catherine. There was a woman across the hall named Pearl. 95, she told me, though she said it the way you'd confess to a crime. We got to talking the first evening because she heard me ask the aide whether I could possibly have my coffee hot, and Pearl laughed from her doorway, this dry crackle of a laugh, and said I was new. 3 days new, I told her. She'd been there 4 years. 4 years! I've lived in my own house for 44 years, and I count that as a long time. Pearl had been in that hallway for 4, and she talked about it the way you talk about something that's already happened to you, even though it was still happening. She had children, too. 3 of them. They came, she said. Holidays mostly. Birthdays sometimes. She kept their photographs on her windowsill turned out toward the room, so visitors could see them, and I thought that was the saddest thing I'd ever seen until she told me why. She said she turned them outward so she'd remember they existed, even on the days she couldn't remember much else. She wasn't being bitter. She'd just made her peace with a smaller life, and she decorated the walls of it as best she could. I'm going to tell you something I haven't told my children. I cried that first night, quietly, the way you learn to cry when you've spent a lifetime not wanting to worry anyone. I lay in that bed that wasn't mine, and I cried. Not because anyone had been cruel to me, but because I suddenly understood how easy it would be. How easy it would be to just let go of the reins, to stop fighting for the small choices, to let them decide when I ate and when I slept and what was on the television, and to slide quietly into that place where Pearl lived, where you turn your own children outward on the windowsill so you don't forget them. It would have been so easy. That's the thing nobody warns you about. It isn't hard to disappear in a place like that. It's the easiest thing in the world. They've removed all the difficulty. And the difficulty, it turns out, was the part that was keeping me alive. That's the first thing I want you to hear, whoever you are. The struggle is not the enemy. The cold coffee I have to reheat myself, the stairs I take slowly, the jar I can't quite open, those things are annoying, and they are also the rope I'm holding on to. Take away every difficulty from a person, and you haven't given them peace. You've given them a waiting room. The second thing nobody warned me about was how my own children would sound on the phone once I was in there. Catherine called the first evening to check in, and I want you to understand her voice was lighter than I'd heard it in months. Relieved. Genuinely, audibly relieved, the way you sound when a weight comes off you. And I sat there holding the phone, and I realized that my being in that place made my daughter's life easier, and that she knew it, and that she felt guilty for knowing it, and that the guilt was making her talk faster and brighter than usual to cover it up. I didn't blame her. I want to say that clearly. I have been the daughter on that phone. My own mother lived her last years in a state I won't describe, and I remember the shameful flicker of relief I felt when she was finally somewhere with nurses and I could sleep through the night. I know that feeling from the inside. So when I heard it in Catherine, I didn't hate her for it, but I understood, finally and completely, that her wanting me in there was never really about my hip. It was about her sleep. It was about her fear. It was about a daughter who couldn't carry the thought of losing her mother, and so wanted to set the losing down somewhere safe and supervised, where she didn't have to watch. Robert called the next day, my middle one. Robert lives 3 states away and loves me in the language of solutions. He'd already looked into the costs, the levels of care, the difference between assisted living and the other kind, and he laid it all out for me in his calm, reasonable voice like a man reading a weather report. He wasn't wrong about a single fact. Robert is never wrong about facts. He just doesn't always notice that a fact isn't the same thing as a feeling. He told me the place I was in had excellent ratings. I told him I didn't doubt it. I didn't have the heart to tell him that you can have excellent ratings and still serve a person lukewarm coffee in a paper cup as the first event of their morning, and that the rating and the coffee are measuring 2 completely different things, and that the second one is the one I actually live in. And then there's Diana. Diana called every few hours, my youngest, my most tender, the one who feels everything at full volume. And here is the strange truth about Diana that I worked out in that room. Diana wanted me cared for so badly because Diana herself is not entirely cared for. She has been through a hard marriage and a harder divorce, and she carries more than she should, and somewhere in her she has tangled up the idea of taking care of me with the idea of finally getting things right. If she can keep me safe, maybe the world makes sense. So her panic isn't really about me. It's about a daughter who is herself in need of someone to call her every few hours and who pours into me the care she's aching to receive. That's a hard thing to see about your own child, that the person trying to take care of you is the person who most needs taking care of. And there's a particular kind of loneliness in it, because you can't say it to them. You can't tell your 61-year-old daughter that you can hear how unwell she is underneath her worry about you. So you just take the calls, you let her fuss, you let her feel useful, because the fussing is doing something for her, even if it's doing nothing for you. I learned in those 3 days that being cared for and being loved are not the same act, and that sometimes the people loving you the most are the worst at caring for you, because they're too frightened to ask you what you actually want. That's the second thing. Write it down somewhere if you're the kind who writes things down. If you love someone old, the most loving thing you can do is not to decide for them. It's to ask them. And then, this is the hard part, to believe their answer. Nobody asked me what I wanted. Not once in the weeks leading up to those 3 days did anyone sit at my table and ask me, "Mom, what do you actually want the rest of this to look like?" They asked each other. They researched. They folded their fears into a folder. But they never asked the woman it was happening to, because deep down they'd already decided I wasn't qualified to answer. I've been answering hard questions since before any of them were born. I buried a husband. I raised 3 children through years I won't go into. I've made every large decision a life requires, and most of the small ones too. And somewhere along the way, in their eyes, I stopped being the person who decides and became the thing that gets decided. That's what age does if you let the people around you do it. It doesn't take your mind. It takes your standing. It quietly moves you from the head of the table to a chair by the wall. And it does it so gently and so lovingly that you can't even be angry about it. I was angry about it, I'll be honest. By the second night, I was angry in a way I hadn't been in years, and the anger was good. The anger reminded me I was still in there. Let me tell you about the third day, because the third day is when something turned. On the third morning, my granddaughter came. Sophie. She's 25 now, and she didn't ask anyone's permission. She just drove 2 hours and showed up before the official visiting time and talked her way past the front desk, which is exactly the kind of thing Sophie does. She came into that room and she didn't bring a folder. She didn't bring a brochure. She sat down in the chair beside the bed, the one Catherine had sat in stiffly with her coat still on, and Sophie took her coat off and she stayed. And she asked me a question nobody else had thought to ask. She asked me what it was actually like, not whether I was okay. Everyone asks whether you're okay, and everyone old has learned to say yes. She asked what it was like, and then she did the rarest thing a young person can do for an old one. She waited for the answer. She didn't rush to fix it or reframe it or reassure me out of it. She just let me talk. And she listened the way Harold used to listen, with his whole face, like what I was saying was the only thing happening in the world. I told her about the coffee. I told her about Pearl and the photographs turned outward. I told her about the silence of never being asked. And I watched my granddaughter's eyes fill up, and she reached over and held my hand, and she said the thing that I've carried with me ever since. She said, "You don't belong here, Grandma. And not because you're too good for it. You don't belong here because you're not done. You're not done." 25 years old, and she understood in one sentence what 3 of my own children, who I love beyond measure, hadn't been able to see. That the question was never whether I was safe. Safe was easy. The question was whether I was finished. And I'm not finished. I have a garden that needs me, even if it's just 3 pots on a back step now. I have a phone that rings with grandchildren on the other end. I have mornings I want to wake up to in a house where I know which floorboard creaks and which window sticks, and where my husband's coffee mug still sits in the cupboard because I have never once been able to give it away. Being finished and being safe are not the same thing. You can be perfectly safe and entirely finished. They had made me very safe in there, and I had never felt closer to finished in my life. Sophie drove me home that afternoon. I checked myself out a day early, which caused a small commotion, and I didn't care. We stopped on the way and she bought me a coffee, a real one, scalding hot, in a real cup, and I drank it in the front seat of her car with the window cracked and the spring air coming in. And I want to tell you, I don't think a cup of coffee has ever tasted like that. It tasted like being a person again. There's a granddaughter of mine, Rose, who's 8. When I got home, the family had gathered. There'd been alarm, of course, Diana in tears, Catherine tight-lipped. And in the middle of all that adult worry, Rose climbed into my lap and asked me, with the directness only an 8-year-old has, whether I'd missed my own bed. And I said yes, very much. And she nodded like that settled everything and said, "Well, then you should sleep in it." Out of the mouths of children, I had spent 3 days and a lifetime of pride trying to articulate something, and an 8-year-old said it in 9 words. You should sleep in your own bed. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing. The right to lie down at night in the bed you chose, in the room you made, under a roof that holds your history. That is not a luxury. That is what a life is. Now, I'm not a foolish woman, and I'm not going to stand here and tell you that everybody should stay home and that those places are villains. They're not. There are people who need that level of care, who are genuinely safer there, whose families have run themselves to ruin trying to do it alone, and for them those places are a mercy, and the people who work in them are doing holy work for terrible pay. I won't pretend otherwise. Pearl needs to be where she is. Maria, who brought my cold coffee with a kind face every morning, is a better person than most. I'm not against the buildings. I'm against the assumption. I'm against the idea that the moment an old person stumbles, the conversation becomes about storage, about where to put them so they stop being a worry. I'm against the speed with which a fall becomes a folder. Because in that speed, in that rush to make us safe, something gets lost that we don't get back, and that something is the simple dignity of being asked. Here is what I worked out, lying in a bed that wasn't mine, that I want to give to you, whichever side of this you're on. If you are the child, the Catherine, the Robert, the Diana, and your parent is getting older, I am begging you, sit at their table before you bring the folder. Ask them what they want the end of their life to feel like. Ask them what they're afraid of, because it's probably not what you're afraid of. You're afraid of losing them. They might be afraid of losing themselves while still alive, which is a different and lonelier thing. Ask, and when they tell you, do the hard, frightening work of honoring it, even when honoring it means accepting a little more risk than makes you comfortable. Because a life with no risk in it is not a safer life, it's just a smaller one. And if you are the one getting older, the one who can feel the folder coming, hold on to your standing. Don't give up the head of the table just because they're trying so lovingly to move you to the wall. Make your wishes known while your voice is still strong. Say them out loud, write them down, repeat them until they're tired of hearing it. Because the silence of never being asked begins the day you stop insisting on being heard. And I promise you, no one will hand your standing back to you. You have to keep it. I keep mine now. I'm more difficult than I used to be, and I've decided that's a virtue. Catherine and I had a long talk after I came home, the first real one in years, and I told her things I'd never said, and she cried, and I let her, and then we figured out something better than a folder. We figured out a little help that comes to me, in my house, on my terms, so I keep my mornings, and they keep their sleep. It isn't perfect. Nothing at this end of life is perfect, but it's mine. Harold's mug is still in the cupboard. I look at it most mornings while my coffee heats up, and it heats up slowly on the stove the way I like it, because nobody's deciding that for me anymore. Some mornings I take the mug down and just hold it. 11 years and I still can't give it away, and I finally stopped trying to. There are things you're allowed to keep that no one else would understand, and the keeping of them is not weakness. It's the proof that you loved something all the way to the end. I'm 92. I don't know how many mornings are left. Nobody does, not really, not at any age. We just pretend we know when we're young. But I know this. The ones I have left, I'm going to spend in my own house with my own slow coffee, with my husband's mug in the cupboard and my garden on the step, and the phone ringing with the voices of people I made. I'm going to be asked what I want, because I've taught them to ask now, and when one of them forgets and starts reaching for a folder, I'm going to look at them the way Pearl laughed at me that first evening, and remind them that I'm not done. I'm not done. Neither are you. Whoever you are, whatever they're trying to decide about you. Keep your seat at the table. Drink your coffee hot. And don't ever, ever let anyone turn your photographs to face the wrong way while you're still here to look at them. That's what I learned in 3 days. I'm glad I went. I'm gladder I came home. The kettle's almost ready. I should go.